Hi, beautiful people. I made my reading goal this year, guys. I did not think I was gonna get to 50 books. I actually got 2 books past that goal. I was like, whoa. And now I'm just literally so excited to be sharing with you guys every single book I have read this year, or last year in 2022. I'm not gonna go super in depth with every single book because I did read 52 books, and if I talked for like 5 minutes on every book, that would be boring. I'm just gonna give like my quick review. Let's just get started right away because I have a lot to say and I don't want this video to be hours long. First book I read this year. Also, these are gonna be in order that I read them. The first book I read this year was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I cannot say enough how much I loved this book. I literally think about it so often still a year later. I absolutely loved the alternating timelines from past to present. And can we just talk about Henry's character? Like, he was the perfect book boyfriend, in my opinion. I did think the ending was kind of predictable, but I still loved the book, and there was a small twist in the last chapter, which I liked. Also, just a PSA, a lot of these books I don't have physically with me because they're either at school, at my mom's house, or I'm letting my friends borrow them. I literally love when my friends ask me if they can borrow a book, and it like makes me so happy. The next book I read, though, is Shadow and Bone. If I'm being honest, I really don't remember that much from this book, even though at the time I rated it 4 stars. I remember I liked this one more than I ended up liking the next book in the series, and at the time, I feel like my opinion changes so much. At the time, I really liked it. Now, I literally don't even remember what happened in it. I do remember wishing that there was more romance in it, and I remember that I did not like Mal and Alina, the 2 main characters, together. The next book I read on my Kindle, and it was the first book in the Bridgerton series, The Duke and I. When I read this book, I had already seen the first season of the show, so it low-key ruined the book for me because obviously I already knew everything that was gonna happen, and the book and the show, at least the first season, were super accurate. I literally knew everything that happened. I still really liked the book, and I feel like I would have given it 5 stars if I had read the book before I watched the show. Then I read Siege and Storm, which is the second book in the Shadow and Bone series. This book I really did not enjoy. It was very long, and I felt like there was very little action in it. It was like 450 pages long, and there was only like 2 action scenes. Because of this book, I still have not read the 3rd book in the trilogy, Ruin and Rising. It's on my TBR for this coming year, but I still haven't gotten to it because I just like really didn't enjoy the 2nd book, so I was like, why would I read the 3rd? Next, I read Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. This was one of my book of the month books. I absolutely loved this book. It was quick, it was fast-paced, it was such a fun idea. I just absolutely loved it. I read it so fast. I love when a book like sucks me in and I read it in like 2 days. I did give this 5 stars at the time. Looking back, I'd probably give it like 4 or 4.5 just because I didn't love the ending. Then I picked up the next book in the Bridgerton series, The Viscount Who Loved Me. So this is the 2nd book. It's what was in the 2nd season of the show, if you watched the show. So this time I read the book before that season of the show came out. It was so close to being a 5-star read for me. I loved Kate's character. I thought she was amazing, and I loved seeing a new side of Anthony that we didn't get to see in the 1st book. But the ending was so disappointing. I can't even explain it without spoiling it because the show made it different, but basically the entire book had so much suspense leading up to the ending, and then the ending was so anticlimactic. Also, after the season came out, it was low-key ruined for me. Like, I didn't like the 2nd season of the show as much as the 1st because I already knew what was going to happen. Then for a class I was taking, I read Alice in Wonderland. You're gonna see a lot of books in this video I had to read for school. A lot of books in the spring semester I had to read for a class called Children's Literature, so I had to read a lot of children's chapter books. You'll see. Alice in Wonderland was a fun and easy read. Low-key, I thought it was confusing sometimes as a college student with like the riddles and stuff. Like, our class literally had to have like discussions about it. It was just a cute little kid's book. Next, I read All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. This book broke me. The topic of this book was something I really hadn't thought about a lot. Haven't seen books written about this topic, like literally at all. I also didn't know that the topic in this book was in this book until I read it. So I would suggest checking the trigger warnings if you're thinking about reading this. The whole book is pretty depressing, but that is the reality of the situation that they're in. So I like understand why it is like that, but also like it was pretty sad like the whole time I was reading it. It's told in the past and the present, and I found that kind of hard to read because it's hard to enjoy the past parts when you see where they are ending up in the present. Then for my children's literature class, I read A Little Princess, or The Little Princess Princess, something like that. It was a children's book I had never heard of before, and I actually really enjoyed reading it. And I think I would like to read it to my kids one day. I don't know, it was just like a cute book, and like it's something I never heard of, so I liked that I got to read it. Then also for my children's lit class, I read Winnie the Pooh. I actually took this book with me to Barnes & Noble, and I read it all in one sitting. I was sitting in a little Starbucks cafe, and it was just like such a vibe. And I actually had never read Winnie the Pooh before. Like as a kid I might have, but like I literally don't remember it. It was really nice to just like read it, and it was like nostalgic but like also new. Then I read No Exit, which I have no idea where that book went. I can't find it anywhere. I literally loved this book. I read it when I was home for spring break, and I remember like sitting in here vibing at night reading it. It was so scary, it was so suspenseful. There were a lot of moments in the book where like I thought, okay, this is the end, like it's gonna be wrapping up, and then like another major plot twist would just come. Like every time I thought it was over, it wasn't over. I also really liked the ending. I didn't think it was cheesy or predictable or anything like that. I've also just started seeing this book a lot in like TikToks and booktube videos, so I'm glad to say I read it before it got all hyped up. Then, ladies and gentlemen, I read The Deal by Elle Kennedy. That book deserves the hype it is getting. It reminded me of being in middle school, staying up till 3 a.m. reading Wattpad in my bed, but like in the best way possible. It wasn't like the writing was bad or anything like a Wattpad book. It was just like the vibes. Garrett, if you like books where the boy falls first, read this one. I'm so excited to read the rest of the series, and the only reason I haven't read it yet is because I don't have them. I know I would like devour that whole series in like a week. Then once again for my children's lit class, I read Mary Poppins. It was really interesting to read because the book is so different from the movie, and as a kid I didn't read the book, I had only seen the movie, but because it was so different I honestly didn't really like the book that much. Then I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which was so freaking good. Gave it 5 stars. I read it while I was traveling, and it just had me hooked from the beginning to the end. I definitely did not see the ending coming, and I still can't really decide if I loved it or not, but I loved the book. So 5 stars, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. Hopefully this year, we'll see. Then my last book for children's lit was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. This book really has stuck with me actually. I genuinely do think about it from time to time. It's really focused on the idea of racism, and personally I feel like that was a really deep topic to have in a children's book, but I do agree that it's something that children should be exposed to and taught about. This next book, I need to take a breath for a second. This book is probably my top book of the whole year. If you take nothing else from this video, take this book with you. The Silent Patient. I literally think about this book daily. I read this book while I was in Florida with some friends. I remember sitting by the pool and I literally devoured it. The plot twist, sometimes books do not get me with their plot twists. Like they don't make me go like, this book had my jaw on the floor. I did not see this plot twist coming at all, and it literally shook me to my core. I recommend this book to everyone. Literally everyone. It was so good. I keep forgetting to hold the books up, but here it is. I swear I have this one with me. Please read it. The next book I read was Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This book was probably my least favorite Emily Henry book. I hope you guys don't hate me for saying that. It low-key had like a pretty slow start for me, and I feel like I didn't even get hooked till like halfway through the book, but I still really loved it. Like I gave it 4 stars. I loved the banter between the 2 main characters, and I love the trope of the guy falling first. I'd still recommend this book, but probably not over Emily Henry's other 2 books. I think she only has 2 others, I don't really know. Then I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. At the time I gave this book 3 stars, but now I would probably say 2 stars or maybe even 1. Thinking about this book, I don't remember a single thing that I liked about it. I'm trying not to be super harsh, but like some books I just don't like. I think the book had a great concept, but I don't think it was executed very well. Also, the book has a lot of fat phobia in it. I'm not gonna go like super in depth on that whole thing. Obviously that was something I didn't like and I felt was really unnecessary to include. The idea for the book is like so complex that you're confused the entire book until the last like 50 pages, and I just personally didn't like that because look how chunky this book is. Then I read Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. One of my friends is actually borrowing that right now, and she just finished it, and I was talking to her about it and it was amazing. Like I love talking to my friends about books. I wrote in my notes, pour my heart out and stomped on it, but then put it back together. And that is that book in a nutshell. The topic of this book is something I never would have thought to learn more on or read a book on. It honestly really opened my eyes to people who are in similar situations to these characters. I also really liked that the romance in the story didn't overpower it. Like, yes, it does have romance in it, but it wasn't like taking away from the main story in the book. and this book is definitely one of my top 3 Colleen Hoover books now. Next, I read Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover. This book, at the time of my reading it, it was my lowest rated Colleen Hoover book. The entire story is built on cheating. Take that as you will. One thing I did think was interesting about the story was that one of the main characters has a disability, but it's not their entire personality. And I don't mean that in like a disrespectful way, but sometimes when authors have a character who has a disability, they make that like the main point of the book, like them overcoming it, but you literally like do not know this character even has a disability until like 50 pages in. So I thought that was really interesting. Then I read Maybe Not by Colleen Hoover. I have never so badly wanted to get a book off of my bookshelf. Like, literally, please don't waste your time reading this. I actually hated it. I'm not someone who's gonna use that word lightly because I think books are like, it's art, and like I'm not gonna say that about someone else's art, but this book, I hated it. It was literally just sex after sex after sex after sex. And the main guy, Warren, he barely knows this girl, Bridget, and he thinks he knows what's best for her, what she wants, and he basically forced her to do everything sexual that he wanted. It reads like a Wattpad book, but in the worst way. Now we're gonna get into a huge audiobook phase. First, I started out with The Alchemist. It was the first audiobook I listened to this year, and actually like my first audiobook I've ever finished. Going into it, I did not know this was a self-help book. For the first like quarter of the book, I was listening to it and I just thought it was like a little story, and I was like, why do people like this? Honestly though, even when I did find out it was a self-help book, I still didn't think it was that interesting. I literally want to read something that I wrote in my Goodreads review like directly. The message is that you should strive to achieve your dreams and goals and not let anything, not even love, family, etc., get in your way. Personally, I feel as though our dreams and goals change depending on who comes into our lives and what happens to us. So I didn't really agree with that whole message. Then I listened to The Midnight Library as an audiobook as well, and I actually really enjoyed this one. However, when it got to the middle where Nora was going through like a bunch of different lives, I did feel like it started to get a little slow and like repetitive, but by the end I loved the message, I loved the story, and I just really liked it. Like even as an audiobook, I liked it too. Next, I read It Happened One Summer. This book, you guys are gonna disagree with me, I know, but I did not like it. And it's so popular, but I really don't understand the hype. Again, I listened to this as an audiobook, and low-key, I think maybe that's why I didn't like it. I just don't think I can listen to romance books as audiobooks. It gives me an ick. It just sounds so cringe. I feel like that's maybe a reason I didn't like it that much. I also felt like the two main characters, a lot of the time when they were talking about each other and what they liked about each other, they were talking about each other physically, when I feel like that is okay for like the beginning of the book. Like when you first meet someone, obviously you're gonna think they're attractive, but I feel like as the story progresses, the main characters should like deeper things about each other. Next, I listened to My Policeman as an audiobook again. I wasn't in love with this book, but I did like it. I didn't hate it, but I'm not gonna say like some people think it's like their favorite book. Not my favorite book, but it was okay. I didn't really like any of the characters, but for some reason I feel like that made me like the book more because all the characters were flawed. I also went into this book completely blind. Like I had absolutely no idea what it was about. All I knew was that Harry Styles was coming out with a movie, so I really wanted to read the book first, and I liked it that way. I was so surprised. Then I read Hopeless by Colleen Hoover. My friend is also borrowing that book. Holy crap, bro. I did not see this plot twist coming at all. I haven't read Losing Hope yet, but like talking about this book right now is making me want to read it so bad. It's literally just amazing. Like please read it. Please read it. Next, I read The Inheritance Games, which another friend is also borrowing. I loved the puzzles and riddles in this book. I didn't think they were like too hard to understand. Sometimes I feel like the riddles are so complex and I'm like, what are you talking about? But this book, it was actually like when she was solving the riddles, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like I get it. It was honestly just a super fun read. Next, I read The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I had already seen this movie when I was pretty young, but honestly, like I didn't understand it. I didn't get like the full depth of it. So reading the book was really nice because I like fully understood what it was about. I also liked the format of it being written as letters. It's not chapters, it's like a letter, and then like at the end it's like Love, Charlie. And it's really short, like it's not that long. I read this in one sitting. The next book I read was the second book in the Inheritance Games trilogy, The Hawthorne Legacy. Honestly, when I read series, all of the books like blend in my mind, so I don't really have much else to say on this book. I gave it 5 stars, loved it just as much as the first. Again, it was just like a fun read. Then I read Heartstopper Volume 1. I haven't read a graphic novel since I was in like 6th grade, so this was so fun for me to read. I read it in like an hour. Like I just sat there and read it so fast. I'm so excited to read the rest of them and watch the Netflix show. I really want to watch the show. Okay, now I know when I say this next part, you guys are really gonna hate me, but please don't click off the video video because I swear you'll understand later. You'll understand later, okay? We'll come back to this book later. So then I listened to ACOTAR as an audiobook and I gave it 1 star. I only listened to half the book and I DNF'd it, but you have to bear with me. We're gonna come back to it later, okay? I promise. Next, I read How She Died, How I Lived. This book was definitely very different from what I was expecting going in. I was expecting more of like a thriller mystery novel, but it's more of like a coming of age or literary nonfiction type book. It could have been like 100 pages shorter too, but I still enjoyed it, and the chapters were super short, which was nice because even though the book is long, I still sped through it. Then I read Catching Fire. Ew, I hated that. This book felt slow at first, but I feel like that's just because I've obviously seen the movie, so I knew it was coming. And even though I'd seen the movie though, I still liked reading deeper about what happened. When I saw the movies, I didn't really get everything, and so reading the book, I'm like, oh, like that makes sense now. And I remember the second I finished this book, I started watching the movie and it was just like so fun. Next, I read The Book Thief. I have never really been a historical fiction girly, but this book got me. I read this book in 6th grade in my reading class, but I literally couldn't remember anything that it was about. So when I got this book for Christmas, I think last year, I really wanted to read it, and so I did this year, and holy crap, please read this book. I literally cried while reading it. If you're trying to get into historical fiction, I highly recommend trying this book. Next, we have a book I never want to see again, so I'm not even gonna look in my bookshelf if it's there. It's Pride and Prejudice. I DNF'd it. I didn't like it. I had like 100 pages left, but I just did not care about the characters, didn't get the hype. I was just so bored. Then I read Red Queen, and at the time I gave it 5 stars. I remember I loved it, but right now I couldn't tell you a single thing that happened in this book. That's a lie. I could tell you some things, but like I really don't remember why I liked it. I remember liking the romance part of it, and there is like a big plot twist near the end, which I really liked. Looking back, I would probably give it like 3.5 or 4 stars just because I literally like don't remember why I liked it that much. Then I finally read the 3rd book in the Inheritance Games trilogy, The Final Gambit. Like I said before, kind of all the books meshed in my head, so I low-key don't remember like what parts I liked and didn't like of this specific one, but I do remember that I felt like the series was like kind of drawn out by the time I got to this book, so that's why I gave it 4 stars while the other ones were 5 stars, but I did still like it. It was like a fun read. Next, Layla by Colleen Hoover. This book was so weird. I literally wrote in my notes, weirdest shit I've ever read, and I stand by that statement. It's a paranormal romance. Take that as you will. I'm not really gonna elaborate on it, but just the premise of the story is very weird. Then on my Kindle, I read Glass Sword, which is the 2nd book in the Red Queen series. It was a lot slower paced than the 1st book. I remember there not being a lot of action in it. I also really started to dislike the main character in this book, and all those things are reasons why I haven't finished the series, and I really don't know if I'm gonna finish it. I have a friend who read it and she was like, girl, it just gets more boring from there. Okay, now we're into the fall semester, so once again I took a class called The Individual in Society, and it was kind of just about how different things in society affect the individual. I read The Plague. I didn't like it, I'm not gonna lie. We just lived through COVID and I felt like I was reading something that I literally just experienced. I found it to be pretty boring, and there was a lot of characters and I felt like it was hard to keep track of like who was who the whole book. Next, I read Verity, the like added chapter version. When I got this book in the mail, I was like, I'm gonna reread the whole thing because I loved this book the first time I read it. Whenever I recommend someone this book, I beg them to read the original because the added chapters ruin it in my opinion. It made like a character I liked into a bad person. I liked how the original version has way more of an open-ended ending and you can interpret it as you want. Also, reading it a second time kind of made me teen Letter, which is weird. Right. Then I read The Family Game by Catherine Stedman. This book had a lot of potential and I felt like the ending didn't really live up to what it could have been. I still liked it though. I did think the ending was predictable, but it's a pretty good thriller, so if you like thrillers, this one's pretty good. Then again, for my class, I read The Awakening. This was a really short book. I don't really have any complaints, but I don't really have like anything I loved about it. It just talked a lot about the role of women in society. Next, I read The Paris Apartment, which I feel like people are again gonna disagree with my opinion on this book. I low-key don't see the hype. Like, it was pretty good. I was seeing this book everywhere and I don't think it's like a 5-star read. There were a lot of twists and turns I didn't see coming, especially the ending, but there were so many parts of this book that were just weird. The amount of people one of the main characters gets with and Mimi's whole character. Then my sister is borrowing this book. It starts with us. This book was absolutely everything I wanted in a sequel. It ends with us is literally my favorite book ever. I literally have a tattoo on my ankle for it. Everyone I've been seeing think it's like cheesy and like corny, but that's what I wanted. I wanted Atlas and Lily to get the ending they deserved. 5 stars. That book was amazing. Next on my Kindle, I read The Unhoneymooners. It was just a cute little rom-com type book. Enemies to lovers, a quick and easy read. Sometimes I did feel like it was cringe, but I still enjoyed it. Now, I said to bear with me on ACOTAR, and here's the moment you're waiting for. I decided to give ACOTAR another try, and this time I freaking loved it. So I think the audiobook just gave me an ick. If you want to see my whole review, I have an entire reading vlog on me reading this book up on my channel. Basically, I freaking loved it, and it converted me to a fantasy girly. Now I'm obsessed with this whole series, and I'll be reading everything by Sarah J. Maas now. She's getting all my money. Then as an audiobook, I listened to I'm Glad My Mom Died. It was literally so eye-opening and literally just jaw-dropping. It literally opens your eyes so much to the fact that everyone has things going on in their lives that you don't know about, even celebrities. This girl is a celebrity and we all watched her on TV and thought she was perfectly fine. Like, she has everything. She has the life, but she had shit going on too. I recommend this book to everyone, but please, please, please check the trigger warnings because it goes through some intense stuff. Then I read A Court of Mist and Fury, and I am obsessed with this book. It was so good. I am waiting to read the next book. I'm so ready. I just want to read it right now. I also have a reading vlog on my channel up of this book if you want to see that. The ending, if you know, you know. That shit was so good. Next, I read There's Something About Mary. This book was mid. It was Hallmark-esque, but I didn't like it. It was just so cringe. I also thought it could be like 100 pages shorter, and there were a lot of typos in the book, which made me so mad. And now, my last book of the year, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. This was a super fun Christmas mystery. It wasn't like the best mystery I've ever read, but it was super fun for Christmas time. The ending was a little disappointing, but I still enjoyed it. And those are the 52 books I read this year. I'm literally so proud of myself for reading that many books. I didn't think I'd be able to, and I literally surpassed my goal. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books in the comments down below because I would love to chat with y'all about them, get your opinions. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.